Investigating Chaos Space Marine warbands can be a lot of fun, and as you go down these chaotic rabbit holes, you find that there's not a whole lot. When you look at Loyalist Space Marine chapters, often they've been featured somewhere in some novel, but for Chaos Space Marines, when you go down the list of information, it's pretty much unknown all the way down for a lot of warbands. Usually you're kind of left with just a really cool picture, but sometimes those pictures are really cool. Flipping through the old Chaos Space Marine 5th edition codex, I came across these spooky fellas. Now, these might look like Plague Marines, especially fighting alongside these old school Plague Bearers against some Vostroyans. Also, if there was anything Games Workshop should ever bring back, it is definitely the Vostroyans. They're so cool with their long Laslock rifles. But these guys are not, in fact, Plague Marines. They are the Cleaved, with weeping eye sockets and oozing joints, and that's about it in terms of lore. These guys are some classic old school Space Marines, and I want to see if a modern take on this color scheme would have any juice behind it. Cracking into a fresh box of Chaos Legionaries, I found some legs and torsos that I like the look of. Gluing them together, I'm reminded that the Legionary kit is frustratingly monopose. The legs and bodies are all attached together. The arms are meant to be keyed as well, but at least there's some options. Are the Cleaved bolter-wielding baddies or chainsword boys? There isn't much to go on in terms of their unique tactics and lore, so I decided to go with the Holy Bolter. Chaos Space Marines in general are a hodgepodge of different armor marks and war gear from the entire history of 40k. This bolter in particular has a drum mag. To drill the gun barrel of a bolter, I always have trouble getting the drill bit perfectly centered. I start out taking a point, either with a pin or the tip of an old airbrush needle, and stab it into the center of the barrel. Then I stick the point of a hobby knife in and give it a few spins to ream out the dent, making it bigger so it'll help center the drill bit. Then I take a drill bit, I like these super sharp PCB drill bits, and I cut down into the gun. Then I run the drill bit through the holes on the side, and then to finish it off, I have this reamer bit for a Dremel. I give the holes a few spins to open it up wider. Doing this in many small steps helps to make sure that it turns out. Many times I have just gone for it and ended up with a very off-center gun barrel. I attached the bolter arms, and now for the rest of my Marine. I mixed up some green stuff in preparation for the shoulder pads. I like to bulk out my Chaos Space Marines to make them look bigger, like they're a real threat to modern Primaris Space Marines. I put a little ball under each shoulder pad to make his shoulders stand off the model a little bit. And this helps me get the exact pose I want. I threw on another little ball in his neck hole, using the round back of a broken airbrush needle to squish it down into his neck, so I can glue on his helmet and make it just that little bit taller. Now, the Cleaved are gross, with oily blood oozing out of them, so I thought having a little dirty cape would be a nice touch. I took a wet wipe and cut off a rectangle of this. These wipes are very fibrous, so it should have a really nice texture once I get it into position. And to get it into position, I cut out an armhole and slipped it behind his shoulder, gluing it down with a little super glue, and then I ripped the bottom edge to make it messy. I held the torn edge under a flame for a split second to burn off the fluffy tear, and I draped it over his shoulder, holding it down with a finger while I soaked it with a few more drops of super glue. I folded the excess over on itself, holding it in place with more super glue, and then when I was happy with the look, I gave it a few more drops of super glue to saturate it and turn it from a porous piece of paper towel into a hard resin-like bit. I gave it another swipe under a flame to burn off any little stray hairs, and then I had a yucky looking little detail. I glued on his backpack, and then to make him even more interesting, I decided to hunt down a shoulder shield from my Loyalist Space Marine sprue collection. I stuck down another ball of green stuff and then pressed the shield into place, right over his shoulder cape. Gotta keep that shoulder pad nice and clean. Now there is actually some lore about the Cleaved. During a battle, the 334th Iridian Regiment of Imperial Guard were cleansing a planet of chaos corruption, and as they fought their way to the center of the Citadel to deliver the final blow, they discovered that this giant fortress had actually been constructed as a giant chaos summoning circle, and that the battle itself had provided the necessary sacrifice to summon the Cleaved. The Imperium's defeat was inevitable, and the game was kind of rigged from the start. Although looking at it from the Heretics' point of view, the Cleaved were actually the saviors, coming to rescue these poor unfortunate renegades in their hour of need. It's a happy ending. Are the Cleaved the remnants of the Horus Heresy, renegades who've fallen away from the Empire in the last 10,000 years, or something even worse? Who's to say, but I think they're neat. It's time to give my little Cleaved a base. I prepared a Cobalt Keep 32mm base with a magnet, and then I coated the surface with some ultra-thin super glue and squished down some 1/4 inch cork. I tore up the edges with my fingers, and then I used the point of a hobby knife to carve in a big crack running up the middle. I want to make the base look like it's a smooth marble floor of a temple. That has seen better days. I coated the surface of the cork in some Tamiya basic putty, and I used a toothpick to smear and smooth it out flat. Then I put on a second coat, and once that was dry, I hit the surface with some sanding twigs to knock down the high spots and leave me with a nice smooth finish. Also, these sanding twigs are one of the many great hobby products available at EonsOfBattle.com. On EonsOfBattle.com, you'll find all kinds of hobby goodies, paintbrushes, texture paste, base and cork, brushes, and our terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit, good for any one terrain pack we've ever made, or the brand new one. New in January, we've created the Tomb Library. a set of hyper-advanced structures designed to quickly get a thematic defensive position up and running on the tabletop. The wall sections create an impenetrable fortress as they crackle with energy, floating just above the battlefield, and following just behind are the sarcophagus, ancient tombs of forbidden power with room to display the aliens' captured trophies and macabre exhibits. This terrain was designed by us and is available now at EonsOfBattle.com. To attach my boy, I loaded up his feet with some super glue, and then now that I know where he's standing, I sprinkled on some loose sand, and I took a clean dry paintbrush and pushed around the sand into nice attractive piles. Once I was happy with the look, I locked it down with a few drops of ultra thin super glue. The ultra thinness soaks up the sand, leaving it where it was, just finding the grains and gluing them down. Now my little Legionary is ready for some paint. I started out with a black prime, and I sprayed on a base coat of Paratrooper Tan. I sprayed this all over the mini, letting some of the original primer show through on the undersides. Once this base coat was on there, I switched to a zenithal of Brain Matter Beige, a warm off-white color. This is the main color of the Cleaved. Now I have to actually use a brush. I grabbed some gunmetal paint and hit on some of the trim, mostly on the backpack and the gun parts of his bolter. Then I grabbed a white paint and hit the rest of the trim, highlighting his head and picking out the trim on his arms and legs. I feel like it's so unusual to see Chaos Space Marines in bright colors. It really transforms the minis. I grabbed some Grim Black speed paint and I hit the armor of his bolt gun and the holster at his side. And now he's almost ready for some grime. The only thing left, getting him set up with some decals. The symbol of the Cleaved are crossed axes. These old Space Marine vehicle sheets have some small axes, not quite the right design, but it'll get the job done. And I also grabbed this little spooky skull from the Litanies and Scriptures decal sheet, available at EonsOfBattle.com. I stuck down the old Space Marine transfers, and I do mean old. The decal broke when I was just sliding it in place, and after I crushed them down, the decal kind of fell apart. Decals don't last forever, and this sheet has probably been in my collection for a decade. Sliding the brand new decal into his shoulder, it went off without a hitch. It slid on perfectly. Going back to the crossed axes, I took some white paint and cleaned up the decal, using it as a guide, putting the white over the spots that got damaged, and going over the decals themselves with some black paint to rebuild the symbols. It was still handy to have the decal give me the shapes, and the brushwork perfected it. Now I have a nice clean marine, and I need to get the base taken care of before I can move on to the grime. I covered the surface in a dark jade green, and while that was still wet, I brushed on some lighter green, doing a stamping motion to blend the layers together so it looks nice and smooth and natural. Then, working fast so everything was still wet, I took some white paint and dragged it over the surface to create the white veins running through this marble flooring. I let that dry, and then I hit the exposed cork with some black speed paint, and I dry brushed the edges with some light green. The cracked edge is very realistic because of the natural edge of the cork, and he looks like he's standing in a perfect little hole punched out of some temple. Now he's ready to get chaosed. If I was putting together an army of the Cleaved Chaos Space Marines for the tabletop, I would want to lean into the idea of them as like a summonable Space Marine chapter, and so I would use the Deceptors detachment. This is one built around giving Chaos Space Marines access to the Infiltrate rule, which ordinarily they don't have any access to, but this detachment gives it to them in a big way. At the start of the battle, you can pick 3 squads of infantry and 3 squads of cultists, and you can give them Infiltrate, so you can deploy them outside of your deployment zone at the start of the game. That is 3 squads of legionaries and 3 squads of cultists, and that's kind of a big deal. Most armies have access to Infiltrate, but usually on like sneaky scouty style units, not your baseline infantry. I think this would be a really fun playstyle that really demonstrates these guys' ability to show up at a moment's notice and be ready to rock and roll. Also, imagine going first. You're already halfway up the board. You just keep pushing. With some kind of nice units, legionaries are not nothing. My little Cleaved Chaos Space Marine is looking factory fresh right now, but he's missing the most important thing about this faction, and that is the grime. My little Cleaved is too clean. I loaded him up with some dark umber enamel wash, and once that was starting to dry, I took a makeup wedge soaked in mineral spirits and started wiping away the surfaces, leaving it behind in the recesses. Now he's got a nice griminess, it's time to make him oily. I dug out my old oil paints, some dark green and some red brown. I took some red brown and put dots of this all over the mini, leaving little dollops behind. Then I came back over these spots with a brush with some mineral spirits on it, and I dripped it into the dots and then dragged the bristles down, leaving me with some nice streaks. I repeated these steps with the dark green oil paint, really cleaving my brush down to make these sickly streaks. I wonder what is dripping out of them. Now the oil is on there, and because I just used a little bit, it's already dry to the touch, and it'll probably be ready for a varnish after about a day. It's plenty dry enough though for me to keep going. I took some tan speed paint and I put this over the shoulder cape so it has a really nice burlappy texture. Then I picked out his eyes with red paint. Can Chaos Space Marine's eyes be any other color than red? With those details picked out, I hit some of the easy to reach edges with some highlights of pure white paint, and then the only thing left was to throw on a couple coats of gloss black paint around the rim. Nobody knows what is leaking out of the Cleaved's armor. I like a good Chaos Space Marine in light colors. Half of all Chaos Space Marines wear black armor, and then like another third wear red armor, so something a little different is nice. In putting together and painting a bunch of Chaos Space Marines, I have seriously been considering starting a Chaos Space Marine army. In fact, might have already gotten some things to start a Chaos Space Marine army with. Now that I have about 16,000 points of Black Templars, it feels like it's time to be maybe getting a little bit more chaotic. Let me know in the comments below what other Space Marine, Chaos Space Marine, Legion or Warband I should take a look at next, and as always, thanks for watching.